iRacing is one of the most beloved yet divisive sim racing titles. Over the past 16 years, it has cemented itself as the place to be for competitive online sim racing, populated with a small horde of wannabe race drivers like myself, but also by professional racists who want to stay sharp between their calendar events and during the off-season. For a long time, I wrote off iRacing purely because of the pricing. But as I tried racing online in other simulators, I repeatedly saw people claim that all roads lead to iRacing. This got me curious, so I decided to take the plunge in January, and I now have a good couple hundred races under my belt. It's certainly been an interesting experience. I've been very impressed with some aspects of the service, but disappointed with others. So this video is just my perspective of iRacing as a newcomer who isn't heavily invested in it. I'm not trying to pass myself off as any kind of authority on the matter. I am but a mere mortal with no alien DNA to speak of, but hopefully what I've learnt can help you decide whether iRacing is going to be worth it for you. iRacing's claim to fame is its status as the most populated multiplayer racing simulator that features a built-in, structured system for ranked competition. Most of the racing takes place in the official series. These are run over 12-week seasons, most commonly with hourly or bi-hourly races, which are live 24/7, typically focusing on a single car or class of cars, featuring a new circuit each week. Each of the series falls under the umbrella of a specific license category, of which there are 5. Sports, Formula, Oval, Dirt Oval, and Dirt Road. Your participation in official series will earn you gains and losses to your safety rating and iRating for that applicable license. iRating is a measure of your overall competitive skill, which is used for matchmaking, and your safety rating is a measure of how frequently you are involved in incidents. This rating will determine your license grade, with certain series requiring a higher grade for entry than others. This is a good system. The variety of motorsport disciplines available is great, and I think the separate license categories is a good idea, because it allows people to dip their toes into completely different styles of racing without fear of undoing their standing elsewhere. I think the main shortcoming of the official series is that some series are practically abandoned and very difficult to get races for. Realistically, this is likely to happen in any game. You can't force people to race what they aren't interested in, but it can be a vicious circle. I think iRacing could incentivize people to race the less popular series, perhaps with some extra store credit rewards or something like that. If you're going to position your service as the multiplayer sim racing experience, you're going to need some solid netcode and quality servers, and this is an aspect that initially won me over to iRacing. Compared to what I experienced in rFactor 2 and Assetto Corsa LFM, it just felt like my connection to other players was better in iRacing. Cars tend to be less visually laggy than those other games. The other drivers tend to move around the track in a way that looks quite believable. It's not jittery, and the cars usually don't slide around the track at weird angles or anything like that. It's pretty good. If you can't tell, I'm from Australia, and I suspect that the positive experience I've had racing against Americans and Europeans is because iRacing has a dedicated Australian server in Sydney, which allows for lower latency and a more reliable connection than most other sims. The experience has been very stable too. The only outages I've experienced was when iRacing was suffering DDoS attacks earlier in the year, which I don't regard as being iRacing's fault. But, and this is a very big but, there's one persistent problem that can be pretty devastating to the quality of racing: the blinking. Blinking is when another player's car disappears and reappears repeatedly, and is typically caused by an unstable connection to the server, but apparently can also be caused by insufficient PC resources. And yeah, I get it, connection or technical issues can happen sometimes. My problem is that the amount of blinking that iRacing tolerates is way too high. Take this as an example. I'm having a battle with another driver, and then he completely disappears for over 3 seconds. Given that this is a competitive service, this is distracting as hell, and it just isn't fair on other drivers who have stable connections. If you're losing connection for multiple seconds at a time, you need to be kicked back to the pits for the good of everyone else. And compounding the issue even further, it's a very common sight to see blinking cars launching themselves to the moon. Obviously, it looks fucking ridiculous, but it's a further visual distraction in the heat of the moment. I think these issues are pretty severe and should be at the top of iRacing's priority list. Despite iRacing's multiplayer focus, the AI is quite good. On track, I find that they behave quite believably, demonstrating less of the quirky AI shenanigans than I experience in most other sims, whilst also being very adjustable. Unfortunately, there are currently significant gaps in the list of supported racing disciplines. For instance, there's no Rallycross AI right now. AI support would be really nice for less popular series, but it is something that iRacing is regularly expanding. Being the sweatfest that iRacing is, practice is very important. There are public online practice sessions, but you can also do solo test sessions, which offers you an amazing feature that I can't believe I haven't seen elsewhere: Active Reset. It's basically an instantaneous rewind feature. Just set your reset point where you want it, and then that way you can repeatedly practice a specific corner or sector, rather than the entire circuit. I love this. It makes practicing far less tedious, and anything that respects your time like this gets 10 thumbs up from me. Every other sim on the market, consider yourself on notice. Get this into your game, please. Aside from this, iRacing's popularity means that you can often find at least one track guide for your car and track combo, and there's websites like Garage61 where you can see telemetry data from other drivers. You can even drive alongside a live race as an invisible ghost car. It's a safe method of seeing if you're on pace with other drivers while you continue to learn the circuit. Pretty cool. To rattle off some other things I like, iRacing's companion app is a good, convenient way to check upcoming race schedules, go over your stats, or just read up on the latest news. The peripheral setup process is good and it helps you to get up and running quickly. Custom user-made liveries are fully supported for both the cars and your racing suit and helmet. And thanks to a third-party tool called Trading Paints, you can download other people's creations and see the liveries that everyone else is using during online races. Many drivers choose to get a little bit creative with their liveries of choice, which might not be strictly realistic, but it's a fun part of the service and I wouldn't want it any other way. If you're running the standalone version of iRacing instead of the Steam version, you can select what content you install to reduce your install size. When driving, the cockpit view is mandatory. As an outspoken cockpit camera supremacist, I really like this because it's nice to know that everyone is on the same page in this kind of competitive setting, differences between each driver's setup notwithstanding, of course. I'm sure that some of you won't agree or even consider it a deal breaker, but I appreciate iRacing's approach here. It's a nice commitment to authenticity. A recent addition to iRacing since I started playing is the rain, which as far as I can tell is the most realistic weather simulation on the market. The difference in car behaviour between the wet and dry racing line and how the track's moisture levels are in a constant state of change from lap to lap, as cars literally suck water up off the track and redistribute it with their spray. It's really immersive stuff. iRacing's track lineup does a great job of straying from the beaten path and including more obscure circuits. When you get sick of racing Monza or Spa for the billionth time, be sure to give Rudskogen a try. It kicks ass. And when it comes to damage systems, I think iRacing's is quite solid. It doesn't compare to something like BeamNG, but for a simulator that is actually about racing, iRacing's damage is significantly better than most. Sometimes though, it feels as if for every strength, iRacing has a weakness. One thing you'll immediately notice about iRacing is its visuals. This game has been around for a long time, and the newer content is of a significantly higher standard than the older stuff, so the game generally looks a bit dated and can be a bit inconsistent from track to track. To be clear, the visual low points are nowhere near what you'll experience in something like Richard Burns Rally, so I don't consider it to be a deal breaker. It's just that when I've been playing iRacing for a while and I fire up a more modern sim, I'm always taken aback by how much better they tend to look. To be fair, if you put aside how the visual fidelity could be higher, I think iRacing does have a realistic art style, which very much suits the hardcore simulation that it's trying to be. Also, the service is known to update the circuits for free. For example, at the start of Season 4 this year, we were treated to updates for both Zolder and Spa. The former in particular I really appreciated, as I think it's an underrated circuit. Even then, I think the much larger issue is actually the performance. Given that iRacing is pretty old, you might think it would be trivially easy to run. It isn't. This means that iRacing is in the very undesirable position of being visually behind the curve, whilst also running slower than much of its newer competition. Just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that the game runs like this because of incompetence by the developers or a lack of optimization efforts. I suspect it's because iRacing is running on an engine from the Paleolithic era, and they are squeezing everything they possibly can from it. Disappointing frame rates are a natural result of that. You always want competitive games to run as smoothly as possible, but for simulators where a considerable portion of the player base are using super ultra-wide displays, triple screens, or VR headsets, you really need all the frames. The upcoming new engine will naturally lead to some nicer visual features, but better performance is what I'm dreaming of. If there's any facet of a racing sim that people are going to bitch about the most, it's the physics and force feedback. And on the whole, I'd say that I like the way that iRacing drives, but it isn't my favourite, for a few reasons. Firstly, I don't think the force feedback is quite as good as some other simulators, as I can't read what the car is doing quite as clearly. iRacing apologists are always quick to say that the force feedback doesn't have any extra effects tacked onto it, and that you only get what you would from the real car. But people say the same thing about Richard Burns' Rally, and the force feedback there feels way better to me. So perhaps the problem is that the force feedback's refresh rate is only 60Hz, which is low by today's standards. There is a new 360Hz mode that was added, but my Fanatec CSL-DD is not supported. There's also an external app you can run, IRFFB, but it didn't work reliably for me, and since it adds latency anyway, I decided it wasn't worth using. Whatever the technical explanation is, don't get me wrong, the force feedback does the job, but it feels like there's a small barrier between me and the car. As for the car behaviour itself, I like it for the most part. Weight transfer feels intuitive, and I particularly enjoy how braking feels in iRacing. For reasons that I don't understand, brakes feel like they have a noticeable bite and a good definition to them that enables you to toe the line before lockup and to trail brake effectively. By comparison, Automobilista 2 in version 1.5, braking feels quite spongy and vague. I have noticed some things I don't like though, which I assume are related to the tyre model. When cornering, the initial levels of grip feel pretty good, and are more or less what I'd expect from a sticky racing slick. But as you push towards the limit of the grip and then go over it, the loss of grip tends to feel more sudden and harder to predict compared to the likes of Assetto Corsa, Race Room Racing Experience, and R-Factor 2. There also seems to be issues with certain cars flipping over when they shouldn't, along with some other weird edge case physics interactions. It's definitely not perfect, but this is all very subjective. You're never going to please everyone with your handling model, and it's also very hard to convey this stuff in words or even with footage, so my advice is to try it yourself and make up your own mind. Some other issues: the heads-up display is dated and limited, which heavily incentivizes the use of third-party overlays. It's not only inconvenient, but many of those overlays have their own subscription fees to unlock their full feature sets. No thanks. Certain functionality, such as voting on the next season's track lineup, requires you to use the forums, when I think that could and should be implemented into the client. iRacing doesn't have a built-in radar system, and for pure realism, I understand the reasoning that people might not want these, but if you're going to allow a magical racing line to be used in the lower license series, I don't see how a radar is a problem. Adjusting the cockpit seating position is annoying because you only have limited ability to do it whilst driving. For some godforsaken reason, if you want to really dial it in, you've got to do it from the replay system. And just for a cherry on that bit of icing, you also can't hide the iRacing watermark in any way, which is infuriating if you're stupid enough to be a YouTuber. A number of circuits lack complete night lighting, which not only undermines that appropriate night atmosphere, but it makes night racing more difficult in a way that isn't realistic. I find the sound of iRacing, whilst not bad, to be a little bit underwhelming. It just lacks a certain liveliness when you compare it to real onboards and some other simulators. To give some credit where it's due though, iRacing has a sound option where you can adjust the cockpit audio to be appropriately muffled based on the type of helmet you select, which is a very cool touch of realism. iRacing has a test drive system so that you can try cars out before purchase. While that's great on paper, it is poorly implemented. Instead of being available in the game client, it is done from a separate test drive website, with bare bones drop-down menus that requires you to create an extra test drive account. Cars must be at least 1 season old, so you can't try the brand new stuff, and this whole thing is only available during server downtime and at the end of the season. Meanwhile, in Racer Room Racing Experience, a free-to-play simulator with far lower car prices, you can test drive every car from within the game client whenever you like. Embarrassing. This all brings me to the elephant in the room, the pricing model. If there's anything that turns people away from the service, this is it, and for good reason. iRacing is, hands down, the most expensive racing simulator. It's not even close. And while some take this fact as proof that iRacing is an overpriced monument of capitalist greed, I think the discussion here is more nuanced. So, to start with, iRacing charges a subscription fee for access to the service, which currently includes 25 cars and 30 tracks as base content. That content covers you for all of the entry-level rookie series. And frankly, some of the most populated series in iRacing are these rookie series, often with good top-split competition to grow into. So I'm sure there are people that just stick to that, keep their subscription topped up, and live happily ever after. But as soon as you want to move past the rookie series, that's where you'll need to start buying cars and/or tracks to participate, and that's where iRacing starts to get pretty expensive. Let's get into some specifics. Starting with the subscription, the full price is $13 a month, plus tax, but if you're paying that price, you're doing it wrong. There are significant discounts for buying 3, 12, or 24 months at a time, and some of these subscription models are well known to go on sale during Black Friday. For example, both last year and this year, we've had a 25% discount on 12 and 24 month renewals and activations. So if you bought the 24 months during that sale, the per month price is about $6.20 plus tax, less than half of the full price. However, if you're a new player, the deals are much sweeter. As far as I can tell, new memberships are permanently 40% off, so you could grab a year for $66 plus tax. But I wouldn't, because it goes on much deeper sales again. When I joined, I bought a Steam sale offer, which was 12 months for about $35 dues, which is roughly 23 burger tokens, and that's including tax. That's less than $2 a month. So surely that's what you should go for, right? Wrong. What you actually want to do is try and score a free 12-month membership promotion from a local motorsport organisation, such as this one here on motorsport.org.au. I'll link it in the description for my fellow Yorak hunters. There are different offers in other countries. There's one that I believe requires a $10 donation, but you get both a year's subscription and an F4 car thrown in. My frugal side is a bit annoyed that I didn't know about these options when I signed up, but now you know. As for purchasing content, each car is $11.95 plus tax, and each track is $14.95 plus tax. These are eye-watering prices, and unlike the subscription, they don't ever go on sale. Instead, there's a bulk discount and loyalty discount system. If you buy 3 or more pieces of content together, you get 10% off. If you buy 6 or more pieces of content together, you get 15% off. Beyond that, if you own 40 pieces of content, you get 20% off any purchase, and if you own everything, you get 30% off any purchase. They also recently added a 10% discount offer for your first purchase on new accounts. Another way to slightly soften the blow of the content prices is the participation credits, where you can earn up to $10 of store credit each season. This is nice if it happens to coincide with the driving that you already wanted to do anyway, but I wouldn't go out of my way for it. It's worth noting that if you buy a car within 12 months of it being retired or replaced from the official series, you'll receive either a full or partial credit depending on how recently you bought it. With all of this taken into account, I have a lot of misgivings about the pricing and business model, but I don't think it's all bad. The content prices are clearly very high, but I think the longevity of the service puts them into perspective. Because of the ongoing live service approach of iRacing, the circuits that you purchase are going to be usable for years to come. The car purchases don't have quite the same longevity, but they don't cost as much and you won't need to buy anywhere near as many of them. I also think the lack of sales means that you won't suffer from any FOMO of deep discounts, so you're free to buy into whatever series you're interested in at any time. If you're into frequent car hopping though, I think there's better sims to do it in. I personally like to commit to one main car or series each season, not only so that I can be more familiar and competitive in my car of choice, but because it keeps the cost down as well. On the other hand, I fucking hate subscriptions, and I avoid them as much as I possibly can by purchasing things outright or buying lifetime licenses where available. I think subscriptions intentionally obfuscate the true cost of using something, because most people aren't going to know how long they actually will be using that thing for. I also think subscriptions are inherently wasteful, because if you pay for 12 months of access to a service, you're essentially making the gamble that you will be able to and willing to use the service within that window of time. That won't always pan out, and since you don't have any right to pause the subscription, that money you spent has now gone to waste. Don't get me wrong, if a service is good enough, I can begrudgingly tolerate it, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. No matter how you dress it up, subscriptions feel bad to me. Compounding this, everything is in US dollars, there's no regional pricing. iRacing isn't a huge company, so that's perfectly fine, but it does obscure the true cost of purchase for those of us who don't have USD in our bank accounts, and it makes it harder to budget for as exchange rates fluctuate over time. And of course, for people who are from areas of the world with low international buying power, the high USD pricing renders this whole thing a non-starter. I've seen iRacers make the argument that the price repels many undesirables who aren't sincerely interested in clean racing, which I think is at least partially true. Barriers to entry do tend to filter out a lot of dickheads, but I also think that one of the best things about sim racing is the accessibility. There are definitely a significant amount of sim racers who would be very welcome on the service that can't participate for really no other reason than the world is an unfair, highly inequitable place, and that sucks. I think there's maybe some things that could be done with the pricing to sweeten the deal a little without undermining the business model. As it is, an iRacing player's expenditure over time looks something like this. Initially, you don't have to buy anything because the rookie series use base content, but then as soon as you want to move upwards, you'll often have to buy one car and a bunch of tracks, so you're immediately hit with a very steep pricing wall. But then from there, the more you've bought on the service, the less you'll have to spend because you already own most of the staple tracks of that series. I think iRacing could potentially implement some kind of one-off beginner content bundles to take the edge off of that early cost spike. Just spitballing here, but perhaps they could bundle together 6 to 8 tracks that see regular use in that license category, plus one car of that player's choice for 35% off or something like that. They'd still be getting a bulk purchase out of the player while making it more affordable for that new user to graduate from the rookies. Additionally, I think it would be nice if the single player features of iRacing were not locked behind a subscription fee, particularly for content that the user has purchased. I can accept the multiplayer and community aspect being paywalled, as not only is that iRacing's biggest appeal, but that's also where I suspect much of iRacing's running costs stem from. As iRacing continues to expand and refine their AI racing, I think the pricing structure should be revised to cater to users who are only interested in the single player component. Currently, I think iRacing treats the AI as simply a training tool for the multiplayer, but I think that's a narrow view of it. I polled my audience recently, and of the respondents, 36% prefer single player over multiplayer, and a further 36% play single player exclusively. I don't think this demographic should be ignored, and it could serve as a gateway for those players to transition over to the multiplayer scene. With that copious amount of hand-wringing out of the way, let's just cut to the chase. Do I recommend iRacing? Well, I think I could categorically recommend trying it for anybody who is curious about it. With the cheap and free introductory offers that are floating around, you have very little to lose. I think whether or not you stick with it comes down to how much value you think you're getting from the service, because cheap and good value are not the same thing. I think if you're primarily or exclusively into circuit racing and you really crave competitive multiplayer but you don't want to join a league, iRacing makes a ton of sense, and I can totally see why you might not bother with anything else. As for myself, I've historically been a rally guy first and foremost, but recently I've been getting into circuit racing more and more, which I think I have to credit to iRacing more than anything. I've made it clear that I do have some significant reservations about the current state of the service, so I've gone back and forth with myself as to whether or not I was going to renew my membership, and part of that process has been to spend more time playing other sims again. And doing that has made me realise that I honestly don't think there's another sim I can go to that provides a comprehensively better experience. At best, you're kinda just swapping the flaws and shortcomings around for others, particularly when you're looking to race online. When it comes down to it, since getting into iRacing, I just don't find AI racing to be anywhere near as compelling as I used to. I still like it from time to time, as it is convenient, but it just doesn't scratch the itch that a good race against humans does. And for that, iRacing has been the best I've experienced. The series that iRacing offers are much more convenient and flexible than leagues, which I don't personally want to deal with, and I think the driving standards and general etiquette I've experienced are far ahead of what you might get in a popular simcade like Gran Turismo or Forza. For instance, I'm coming up on 250 races and I've only been intentionally rammed twice. And including those two incidents, I've only needed to protest unsportsmanlike behaviour about 5 or 6 times. Shit does happen, these are human beings after all, but I think the player base is fairly well behaved on the whole, though I do keep the chats disabled for my own sanity. But I think what ultimately gets me over the line with iRacing, and this is maybe the best thing I can say about it as a sincere endorsement, is that as a company, they have my full and utmost confidence that they will get their service into a comprehensively world-class state. This year alone, there's already been significant additions and improvements. And to put my criticisms into perspective, almost everything I've complained about in this video has been acknowledged by iRacing and is explicitly confirmed to have improvements and overhauls in the works. In some cases, development updates have been shared, and new team members have been hired for that specific thing. The high transparency and pace of development contributes greatly to the sense of value for me, so I've chosen to stick around. I think that whether you're an iSimp pay pig or you're a militantly iphobic haterade chugger, we can all agree that iRacing provides a unique form of entertainment that nothing else can quite match.
Why? Oh, I know why, because it didn't do anything to his car, it's fine, he still gets to finish. What is this? What is this? He just jumps over us and, and he drives off. I've got a perfect audio clip for this, for moments like this.
iRacing is the most advanced and comprehensive racing simulation software in the world. It's also the most realistic.
You only get this in iRacing. What is this? What is this? The whole situation. No rear wing, no front wing. And then this guy tries... Textbook overtake. What is this? What is this game?
Thanks for watching.
Fuck him out.